As Ikedike sat, pondering on all that he has heard, a lot of things were falling into place now. And a lot of the parables his grandmother always said to him were making meaning. He had always seen the said eagle, especially when the hand of his mother, or rather his stepmother now, had been heavy on him. The eagle could always find him, no matter where he was hiding, and its presence always brought such a relief that all pain felt like an imagination. His grandmother had found him with the eagle one of such occasion, and she smiled and said something that had puzzled him, but this story has answered a part of the puzzle. She said, "The eagle has at last found its owner. I hope it can amend its way at long last." He now understands that perhaps he has something to do with Mbada, their first father. But what amendment does he have to make if that was the case? After pondering these things, he decided that it was time to tell his father what his grandmother had told him a long time ago. He straightened and called to his father, who had been lying back with his eyes closed. Ikedike knew how patient his father can be and that he was in no way asleep. Immediately, Okonkwo was tapped. He straightened on his chair and opened his eyes, looking at his son expectantly. "Yes, my son," he answered. "I have something I want to tell you," Ikedike said. "Go on, I am listening," Okonkwo replied. "You know that Mama Nuku died in my arms." "Yes," Okonkwo said, now getting more interested in whatever his son has to say, because he often wondered what they were discussing on the day of her death. But knowing how mysterious and quiet his son can get, he had decided to give it time. For time has a way of revealing the most hidden of things, and now his patience may be paying off. So he paid much attention to what his son was about to say, because he knows it will be a great revelation. Ikedike continued. "Before she passed, she told me I will welcome a son, who will give Mbada and his sons another chance, that the sign of his birth will be the sun, but we must accept the one who will return to render help. If not, he will not find his way home again." She also said, "I must raise him on the portion of land which she gave to me, for that is where the blood was spilled, and that is where it must be forgiven." I asked her how these things must be. She said the eagle who has found its way home will guide the path. Since her death, I never saw the eagle until the day Machi went into labor, and the one who you said looked like my mother came. She had perched on her shoulders, the eagle, but I was only able to see it briefly, as I had to go do as she commanded. And my son had the sun in his eyes when I carried him after his birth, much like the shape that appeared on his forehead after that night. And like you said, when I returned after the cleansing ritual was done on my wife, to ask the mysterious maiden some questions, but Machi told me the woman left, leaving behind an image of the eagle carved with a stone that I have never seen before. "Can I see it?" his father interjected. "No, father," Ikedike said. "Urima had instructed that I touch it with the blood on the cord of my son before burying it. I did as she instructed, but the next morning I couldn't find the eagle totem again where I had hidden it. I went to Machi immediately to ask if she had taken it by any means, and she said she has not left her hut since she delivered. But she gave me the last part of Urima's message. Urima has said that when the blood of the offended touches the totem of friendship, it shall go where only its owners can find it." Okonkwo interrupted. "What does that mean?" "I didn't understand the unsettling message myself," Ikedike replied. "But I asked Machi if she was sure she remembered everything that was said to her. She said she was almost asleep by the time she was saying the last part, so she wasn't sure if she missed anything." "Describe the totem as best as you can," his father said, sitting up again as something flashed in his memory. Ikedike thought for a moment and said, "Its length is about the length of my palm, from the longest finger to the wrist. I can close my palm around it, but not completely, and it has the color of leaves in rainy season. He stopped, waiting with hope that his father would be able to shed more light on what the item may be, because he was able to obey the instructions of the woman through his wife, because she bore some of the signs his grandmother told him about, especially that of the eagle. And now that he knows who or what the eagle represents, he was more glad that he did. But now he was curious to understand what the rest of his grandmother's parables meant. Okumpa sat back and looked at the sky sprinkled with stars and the full moon shining brighter than he has ever seen. Ikedike was shocked to realize that it was so late when he followed the gaze of his father. He was called to the Obi at noon. How has time gone so fast? After a long moment staring at the sky without further words, Ikedike wondered if his father had finally fallen asleep with his eyes open. Okumpo turned in that instant to his son and said, with a note of finality, "Go to your family, my son. We have a long day tomorrow. After the coming of age ceremony, we will talk again, and I will explain what that totem means. Our world is about to change." Omire, on the day of his coming of age, was woken up before the first crow of the cock by his father. And when they got to his grandfather's Obi, he found out that every male of Umambada kingdom has assembled there, and he was amongst the youngest. His grandfather looked at him, but he couldn't make out his face, as the sky was still dark and the light from the Mpalaka was not bright enough for him to read faces, but he was quite sure it was pride and joy he saw there. His grandfather has always looked at him with those written all over his face. He is yet to understand why he is the only male in the midst of so many grandchildren, until his brothers came a few seasons ago. He hardly had a playmate unless he went to the other families around, or they come looking for him, because the adults in his family always wanted him around, so he doesn't have much opportunity to go out as he wants, especially his grandparents. Left to them, he will sleep and wake up right in their presence. But he wants to go exploring with his age mate and go bushmeat hunting like those around him. The other day, Odinaka went to the stream and caught a very big okpo, a catfish that is quite rare in their river. But he has never been allowed to do much of those things. But now he is about to become a man. All those things will change. So it was with great expectation and anticipation that he is going for the ceremony. By this time, his grandfather had finished his ritual as the chief of the 12 families, and the heads of the remaining 11 families came to perform their lot on the heads of the boys, now turning into men. The coming of age ceremony was not performed every season. It is determined through the divination symbols seen by the seer. Until the sign of age comes, the ceremony cannot hold, which is why sometimes some are older than others, but the science has never delayed like it did this time. It is said the last ceremony was performed some 5 seasons ago, but strangely, not many sons were born in that interval. A boy child is certified to be a man when he has approached his 10th season, and that is when he qualifies to be initiated into the secrets of his fatherland. The elders and seers take the young ones to the great grove of Chiligwe, where they are taken through different rituals that will make them known to their ancestors and their land. And for 3 days and nights, no food or water is allowed to cross their mouth, because they are to put the omo leaf in between their lips, unless when they are allowed to sleep for a little time. So no utterance has been heard except for the occasional mumblings of the seers as they perform their sacred duties. The first thing that enters their mouth after the 3rd day is the sacred water of Mbada that flows in the center of the grove. By the time the ceremony and ritual of initiation was over, their stomachs were singing and he thought of all the delicacies his mother and grandmother would have kept for him. His grandmother especially would have made sure she reserved the biggest portion of the meat for him, as she always does. Omire shook his head and told himself he was now a man and must begin to think like one. He is now the custodian of the secrets of Mbada and Chiligwe, so he must behave as he has been instructed to. He concluded and faced the high priest, who was blessing them with water from the Mbada stream, the river that brought their first progenitor to this land that is theirs now, and has since blessed every farmland it watered. 2 days they were in the sacred grove of Chiligwe, going through the rituals that only grown men of their land knew about. At dawn on the fourth day, one or two of the boys had cried for water or food, but most had bore it like the men they were becoming. His father and grandfather had looked at him with pride when he remained one of the strongest in his age grade, helping those who couldn't stand at some point. As they marched silently back to the village, their initiation process complete, he thought of the sight he had been seeing since they entered the sacred grove. He had never slept without the sights coming to him. They stayed till he was up again, and sometimes they come even when he was wide awake. He had always been seeing some of them since he could remember, so they were not a strange thing, especially the eagle that always visited even while he was wide awake. But he doesn't come when he was around people. The first time he remembered seeing the eagle, he was so little that he couldn't pronounce its name well. His mother's friend had come to visit. As he was playing, the eagle came and perched on the low branch of the occam tree in the middle of his father's compound. Even as he was so young then, he remembered feeling as though he knew the eagle. He ran back to his mother and tried to tell them that a big bird was on the occam tree, but they didn't understand him, so he had kept quiet. But when he looked back, it was not there anymore. So when his father came back that evening, he had told him of his encounter with the big bird. His father had asked if the big bird with the color of the sun and if its neck has feathers like that of the cloud after the rain. Omire had jumped up in excitement. At least his father understood him. So his father had called him after he was done with his dinner and took him to his obi. When he sat on his father's laps and rested his head on his big chest, he felt at home, waiting for sleep to claim him. But that had been their routine since he could remember. But this night seemed different because after a few moments of enjoying each other's company, his father raised him up and sat him down on the low stool made for him. He has said, "My son, the bird that visited you today is known as Ugo, the spirit bird of our first ancestor, Mbada. There are only 3 people we know it has visited in broad daylight since the death of Mbada. Myself, the high priest, and now you. It is not a bird that is seen randomly by anyone, so anytime you see it again, keep it to yourself and make sure you bid it welcome, for it has come for good." He didn't understand much of what his father had said that night, but they had had the talk over the years, so he was able to understand much more as he grew older. Now, there are some sites he would like to be given an interpretation of, but that will wait, because there is a great celebration that awaits them once they get to the village square. After the initiation rites that involved all the elders of the 12 families, each family prepares for their new member or members with the resources that is available to them. But amongst what is necessary is a hut built according to the rank of the male initiated. If he was the first male, his hut will be left of the family obi, as his father's is right, with a portion of land assigned to him as his first personal farm lot, and the size of the land is again dependent on the wealth and possession of the said family. Then the mothers in the family prepares wrappers according to the family standing. His fathers also prepared farming and hunting tools. After the new initiate has been formally presented to the entire families, food starts pouring in from every corner. His grandmother and mother brought him what they prepared especially for him, beaming with pride, because his strength and manliness had been spoken about by the elders. Other mothers who would want him to teach their sons or their sons' sons also brought him gifts and food. He saw food and lost all the appetite he had been gathering for 3 days. The celebration usually go on for days, so he had enough time. About 20 market days after the coming of age ceremony, his mother sent him to the Okoli family to collect ashakala from Mama Emeka, as her own was not enough for her to spread her abacha for drying. His little sister was tagging along as usual, because whenever he was going to the Okolis, she would always want to go with him. Emeka's younger sister was her best friend, and they always find ways to meet and play. Whenever their mothers were visiting each other, separating the two when it is time to go home was always a tug of war. But Rima never does that with him. He remembered the day she was born. A young, beautiful woman had come to him as he was gathering food for the goats in the bush near their compound. He looked at her and felt like he knew her, but can't remember ever seeing her anywhere. She stopped in his front and said, "Tell your fathers, I am returning to them, but they must call the child by the given name." Mary asked her what the given name is. She said, "Ask him about the maiden with the eagle perched on her shoulders." That was when he saw the eagle that was sitting on her shoulders, its wings spread as if it wants to take flight. He dropped his cutlass so he could ask the beautiful maiden a little question about the eagle. But when he raised his head, she was gone. He couldn't search because his mother's scream rented the air at that moment as he abandoned all he had gathered and ran back home. On getting there, he saw his father pacing back and forth in front of his hut and his grandfather sitting down at the entrance to his father's obi, calmly tapping his feet to beats only he could hear. He saw some of his grown unmarried female cousins at the entrance of his mother's hut, carrying clay pots containing steaming hot water. He could hear his grandmother encouraging his mother to push as it would soon be over. He understood then that he was about to have a sibling, so he joined his grandfather to sit down. But each scream from his mother's hut had him springing to his feet again. As the sun was setting over the Odi hill, he heard the piercing cry of a baby. His father then ran into his hut and brought a keg of palm wine with iko and dropped them at his grandfather's feet, and went in again and brought a bundle of white cloth and handed it over to his grandmother, who stood at the entrance of his mother's hut. When she was brought out, he saw the eagle perched on the roof of his mother's hut, and he remembered the visit from the beautiful maiden. He went to his father as he was presenting the child to his grandfather and looked at his sister's face as he was told it was a girl. He was shocked and couldn't hide it. His grandfather, always very attentive, noticed his reaction immediately and asked what the problem was. Omire shook his head as if to clear it and looked at his baby sister again. This time it seemed all squeezed and ugly. He looked at his grandfather, who was still looking at him and waiting for an answer. "Papa, there is something I want to tell you and my father," Omire replied at last. The men nodded without wasting time and took him into the obi, handing the baby over to Mbori, who was waiting eagerly. When they were seated, Omire delivered the message he was given by the maiden and told them how his sister looked exactly like the maiden for a brief moment, which was why he reacted the way that he did. Immediately he finished, his grandfather stood up and went out into the open compound. They watched as he performed the Iya dance. It is a complex movement of the body that titled men do when they are celebrating great events. My grandfather, despite his old age, performed this dance with such grace and beauty that my uncle brought his oja to sing his praises. When he was asked why he did that when it was just a girl child, he said, it is his mother he was welcoming home. Her birth had heralded many good things to the family because immediately after she was born, my mother was found with child again. And when she delivered, it was 2 boys at the same time. Something that has never happened to any woman in the 12 families. Their birth was celebrated by the 12 villages that make up Mbadaland because they were seen as a sign of Omomo. My mother, since my birth, had been seen as a blessed woman. But with the birth of my Ejima brothers, her status has since been the favored daughter of Mbada. If she is seen with you, then you are a blessed woman indeed. Her friendship with Mama Emeka from the outcast family of the Okolis was a thing of shock to the villagers, but my mother was too revered to be made an outcast amongst her people. Her actions had made Mama Emeka to become a lot more accepted amongst the women in the village, even though she was not yet included in the meeting of Ndemuyedi, a group made up of women married from outside the village of Umumbada. The reason is not part of my problem. It is women's matter, and only women can understand themselves. Umire thought to himself as he delivered the message his mother had sent to him and went about his own activities. 3 years after, Umire, now grown to be a young, handsome man. He was strong and his generosity was no longer news. Every family were vying for him to become their in-law. But he was a man filled with unrest. Looking at him, you will never know because he was a robust-looking young man. But the sights had decreased. His mother has been worried because she wakes up most mornings looking like a man who never slept. His father had called him several times to find out what is bothering him. They had even suggested getting him a wife from any family he chooses, but he knew it wasn't time to bring down the burden that he carried. He had begun to understand more and more why most things are the way they were in Umumbada. He just does not know yet how to resolve it without setting the entire kingdom ablaze. His family is the head of the 12 families, and he is the first grandson in the ruling clan. Whatever he does, we have a ripple effect. So he was waiting patiently for sign and a way out, so that the wrong can be corrected without further damage to the generations to come. He continued this way till he was a full-grown man of 20 seasons. He was the only one among his age grade that was yet to be married. Most eligible maidens refused every suitor in hope of being the lucky one he would choose. His grandfather had summoned him and his father to the Obi one day to inquire of the delay. He was asked if he had a problem with his manhood, or is there any maiden he fancied who has refused him. His reply was negative to all the questions. Then tell us what the matter is, and we, your fathers and elders, will seek the solution. His grandfather busted out frustratingly. At your present age, I was already a father to children. Same with your father. He had you when he was only 19 seasons. Tell me why you have refused to marry, my dearest child, he pleaded. As they were talking, Urima, now growing into a beauty never seen, came and stood at the entrance to the Obi, respectfully waiting to be invited. When they noticed her, Okonkwo rushed out and held her by the hands. My beautiful one, is there any problem? His eyes filled with concern as she looked troubled. She nodded, and he quickly took her inside the Obi. After she was seated with her brother and father by her side, looking worried, Urima is their sunshine, the ever-cheerful one who will always get you to share in her joy, no matter the mood she finds you. What makes her so happy, Nobody can tell. But what everyone knows is that when Urima is around, the air lightens up. So seeing her gloomy now worried her family in no small measure. Quickly go to your grandmother and ask her to give you the herbs for calming one down she got from Abu. But Urima held his hand as he made to stand up. No, Papa, I don't need any herbs. I just need to unburden myself and I'll be okay. Urima said, Okay, Anyamum, my sunshine, go ahead and tell us everything and we will take care of it immediately. Yes, Ma, her father and brother agreed. The case of Omire temporarily forgotten. Urima began. I went to the river a fortnight ago, during the full moon, as our age grade does. Yes, I remember, Okonkwo replied. As we were returning after collecting the Nzu and Oro for our beauty treatment for the upcoming marriage of Adako, the daughter of Chief Emenike, I saw a man by the entrance of the great forest, where the tree-forked road joined, and he was dead. I screamed, but I couldn't hear my own voice, and the dead man stood up and said, warn them to tell my story again, or I will never forgive. Immediately, I couldn't see him again, and we were almost at the front of Chief Emenike's Obi. I didn't know how that was possible, and since then, I have not slept without seeing him saying the same thing over and over again. She trembled as she concluded her story. Her father lifted her from the stool and sat down while still carrying her as if she was a baby. Her brother knelt beside them, rubbing her legs. Okonkwo stood from his recliner and paced the Obi, pondering what the incidents could mean. Who is the man and what story does he want to be told right? First light tomorrow, he will go and consult with the high priest. He had left off too much wrong in his household for too long. What with Omire and now his beloved Iroma, two people that bring so much joy and satisfaction to him and the entire community under attack. This cannot be taken for granted anymore. Who was after him and his family? But enough is enough. A man cannot be in the river and sand will enter his eyes. When he had come to this conclusion, he had a little peace. What is impossible is death. Anything else will have a solution. Okonkwo left his Obi and called to one of his sons, Ikagu. Please take 2 of the cards and take Urima back to her mother. I haven't finished with her father and brother. Ikagu entered the Obi and made to carry Urima, but she got down from her father's lap and held her uncle's hand instead. Nobody gets that close to her except the 3 people she left behind in that Obi and her mother. When she was escorted out, Okonkwo made to reveal his decision to his son and grandson, but Omire raised his hand respectfully, and when Okonkwo gave him the go-ahead, he apologized for interrupting his grandfather and went on to explain why he did. Nam, Papa, he called them, please sit down. This is going to be a long talk. They both sat, and Omire sat as well, facing them. I know there are questions you have asked which I have not been able to answer, and I am grateful for your patience so far. But I have been careful of speaking words which were greater than me, so I have waited for signs all these years. His father and grandfather looked at each other as they sensed something was about to hit them, but they didn't interrupt the young man. Omire paused as if organizing his thoughts. His fathers waited patiently. He continued, Nam, do you remember when I was a little boy before the birth of Urima? I told you I saw the great bird, which you later told me was the eagle. Yes, I remember, Ikedike answered. Well, I have been seeing the eagle more often since I did what you instructed. The message that I brought before the birth of Urima was given to me by the maiden with an eagle on her shoulders. Yes, Okonkwo and Ikedike chorused. There was something else she told me which I didn't say. The last thing she said to me was, Mbada, an Ogonna has been given a second chance to right the wrong. Don't lose it like your fathers did before. I have always wondered what that meant, and ever since then, I have been having the sight. It intensified when we entered the great forest for the ritual of coming of age. The first sight I got there was a very huge man humiliated without cause and eventually killed by one he considered a friend. On the last night of the ritual, I saw the sight as Urima described, but mine was of the same huge man, his hands and feet tied, and he was making an attempt to say something to those who were throwing stones at him, but he seemed to be a man of slow speech. So the anguish he found himself made his speech slower than usual. The more he tried to speak, the more they stoned him. Till he fell by that wayside beside a fork road, his face bloodied and unrecognizable. I always wake up at this point, but each time I attempt to tell either of you, I've always felt strongly I must have all the answers before speaking. And Orema's incident has given me liberty to speak. Both of his fathers were now sitting on the edge of their seats, looking intently at him. Another sight that reoccurs more often is that of a young woman. She always comes to me bound and looking like one who has not been fed food or water for generations, but on who death has refused to call. Her only words were always, I was foolish and greedy, and I destroyed a great man by making him kill his friend. When I asked her what his offense was, she would say, my son, my precious son, wants to marry his daughter, the daughter of a slave. I wasn't going to be alive to witness it, so I lied to ensure that he never saw the light of day. I also asked her how come she was able to get his attention to do what she did. She said that on the night that she made her plan, she went to him to seek his assistance, that there was a snake in her hut and she needed help to kill it. Being the kind man that he was, he followed me without question. And when we got to my hut, he didn't find the snake and he was about to go back. It was when he stepped out that I grabbed his wrapper and started screaming. I could see how tormented she was, but I could never see who her tormentors were. The third sight is that of an image of the eagle carved out of a stone, but this stone was the color of the Uyi River during the harvest seasons, but it shines as if a little light is coming from the insides. I saw the huge man that was killed carve this stone into the image of the eagle so carefully, like it was meant for a precious person. And I saw him give the eagle to another man who looks a lot like grandfather, but he was a man of fierce appearance. But when he received this gift, his countenance changed and almost softened. I saw them sit before a shrine and swore their friendship. With the image of the eagle as its totem, this sight has been coming, and lately they have become frighteningly consistent that I can't sleep most nights. This is the reason why I haven't set my sight on any maiden, and why I look troubled most times, Omire concluded, looking at his father and grandfather as they both sat as if rooted to their seats. Okonkwo was the first to gather his thoughts, and he said to Omire, indeed, you are one who is destined to do great things, for you have been sent to correct an evil that has brought calamity upon our people and their land. No one else would have been strong or wise enough to bear this burden unless he was born for it, like you were. I am most grateful to Cheligwe for keeping me alive to witness the rebirth of Mother. May you live long, and may your path be filled with honor and wealth, of lands and of sons. Okonkwo blessed his grandson. He turned to Ikedike and said, do you now understand the puzzles you once had? Yes, father, I understand better now, Ikedike replied. When you told me about the eagle totem, Ikedike, I knew that what my fathers had long prayed for was at last about to be answered. That totem, as I was told by my grandfather before he died, disappeared from the Obi of Mbada on the night that Ohu, his friend, was killed, and his body thrown into the great forest. It was like you saw, the sign of their great friendship, which began before Mbada set out in the search of his own land. As he was the eighth son of the Uhe, so he didn't want to drag land with his 7 brothers, and he had dreams of building his own kingdom. So he didn't want to drag land with his 7 brothers, and he had dreams of building his own kingdom. So when he set out, he asked his father for 2 things. The stone Ohu's father came with when he was captured as a war prisoner. Ohu, out of gratitude to Mbada for treating him like an equal, carved the eagle for Mbada. And after Mbada found out Ohu was of royal blood, promised to set him free. So when the totem of their friendship disappeared, Mbada was said to have cried out in pain, knowing immediately that his friend, who has speech problem since his tongue was pierced with hot iron, must have been innocent. Ogonna, the 3rd wife, was called and asked again, but she insisted that her testimony was true. On the night that Mbada told his son that he would visit a great oracle in a faraway land to know the truth, he never woke up. Mbada was said to have died in his sleep, so everyone believed Ohu was guilty, and Cheligwe was only angry at Mbada for trying to cancel his judgment on the slave, Okonkwo told them. But even though everyone believed this popular saying, the elders have always wondered at the strange events surrounding Mbada and Ohu's death. And consultations has been done by several generations when the birth of sons started dwindling. But all that has ever been said was, when the eagle returns, answers shall be given. Now answers has been given. What shall we do to rectify the evil our matriarch did against the land? For it is clear now she lied, and her lies has been established over the generations, especially by this family. If not for Mmachi, your mother, that has stood against the injustice on the Okoli family, how would we have been able to redeem ourselves from such atrocity? Father, it wasn't you or mother's fault. You were just following the tradition of your father as it was handed down to you. Ikedike tried to pacify his father, but Okonkwo shook his head and said in deep sorrow, Ikedike, my son, you and your wife Mmachi showcased the wisdom and courage that I and my fathers lacked by questioning what didn't look right. In spite of what we were told, we should have asked more questions to make sure the path we were walking was the right one. For the elders rightly said, he who asks questions never misses his way. I am glad we have been given another chance to redeem ourselves from our foolish mistake. Tomorrow, I will call for a meeting with the heads of the families and see how we can resolve this issue and approach the Okoli family for restitution and peace. When he was done speaking, Omire said he had one more thing to say. Go ahead, my son, Okonkwo replied. When the matters are all resolved, I have a maiden in mind that I would like to marry. And for the first time after the long hours of revelation, smiles broke out on the faces of Okonkwo and Ikedike. Which family is she from? Ikedike asked eagerly, as if he was the one getting married. Omire smiled and told them who it was and her family. Their eyes widened in shock, but they were glad because this has given them the perfect solution to the problem at hand. They only hoped the Okoli family would be more forgiving than they had been. Machi held her friend, Mama Emeka, as her frame was continually shaking with the great sobs escaping her mouth. Machi couldn't help but cry too, because she couldn't imagine the pain of rejection and loneliness this family had had to endure for generations over something they were not guilty of. Their children had had to marry far because nobody within the Umumbada kingdom would dare associate with them, not to talk of marriage. They can't even own land except in the great forest, where many of their sons had been torn apart by wild animals. They do not have a burial place for their dead, so they had resorted to burying inside the great forest. They can only buy from strangers who came to trade at the great Nkwo market. So many atrocities committed. How much tears can wash away such grief and sorrow? How can they restore their dead who had died unnecessarily, either by wild animals or by sickness, because the medicine men and women within reach had refused to treat them? It was too many to count. So Machi kept quiet and offered her friend her arms as she cried out her pain. As the truth of what transpired generations ago became public knowledge, Machi saw firsthand how unnecessary most things men held in high esteem were. All the restrictions and groups, what has it gotten those who had kept them? Now everyone wants to be seen with the Okoli clan. Everyone is trying to outdo each other in giving them gifts. Lands has been offered, marriage proposed, and so many other things, as if that will suddenly wipe away the generations of marginalization and injustice meted out. She was so grateful to her chi for that hot afternoon where she was given a chance to make up for her foolishness. She was so grateful that she was given children who didn't follow that foolishness because it has been called tradition. Her daughter Urima had shunned anyone who shunned her best friend. Nomiri ensured Emeka was included in whatever he was involved in, and anyone who doesn't want Emeka automatically doesn't want Omiri. They had been silently fighting this battle, and she couldn't be more proud of her offsprings. As the sobs subsided to mere heaves, Mama Emeka straightened from Machi's arms, looking at her friend with reddened eyes. They sat in silence for a while. No words were needed because they had sat this way too many times in the past when there seemed to be no hope. Now that there is hope, now that there is a new dawn, words are no longer needed because a friendship that had been forged in fire requires no words for understanding. When Mama Emeka felt better, she said she had to go back home and supervise dinner. At the entrance of Machi's hut, Mama Emeka turned and told her, "I am honored that my daughter will come under your care, and your son will be the father of my unborn grandchildren. Even if I die now, I will die happy, knowing that my children and their children have been taken care of." Machi hugged her friend and said nobody was dying anytime soon, and that the honor was hers for the privilege of marrying into royal blood. They both laughed as Machi escorted her friend. It has been 2 years, and the marriage between Omire and Ogonna had been concluded successfully a year ago. Ogonna was with child, as a matter of fact, and with the visions she had been having, she was sure she was carrying more than one son, but time will tell. Urima is preparing to get married, as she at last agreed to marry the cousin of Ogonna, who was given a large portion of land after the settlement just behind her father's compound. Peace was returning to the land of Umumbada, as was once enjoyed in the beginning. And in the last year alone, after the settlement, more women had born more sons. Okonkwo now sits in his obi, a fulfilled man, who is enjoying his grandchildren and waiting to welcome their children, if life was granted him. Ikedike, still in love with his wife, as if it was their marriage night, was warned by Omire not to bring another sibling into this world. Their laughter always rang out late into the night, and the ego now perches more often, watching them. Omire discovered the place the totem was buried, and it has been restored to the Obi of Mbada, that is now occupied by Okonkwo, and the Okoli family has been given their full rights. They can now join the coming of age ceremony, and the Obi of Mbada now welcomes them. The truth, which became distorted, has now been corrected. And so Mbada and the ego totem have now been restored to their rightful place. For peace reigns in the land, and there is joy amongst the people.